Brother George, I wanted to say hello
Yes,
to begin with before you get started and just thank you. Years ago in Holy Cross, San Antonio, we took a trip up to St. Ed's with my English teacher, Jim Franz, if you remember him.
I remember that you came to my Chaucer class.
Yes, the Canterbury Tales. Yeah, it was a turning point for me. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed reading the Canterbury Tales after that and poetry in general. So that was awesome.
Principal down there? He's
Uh,
still principal?
No, sir. He's been gone a good 15 to 17 years. He moved up to Tyler and now he's in Oklahoma. He's still a Catholic school principal though.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we should start. Anybody opposed to that? I don't hear any opposition, so I'm going to start. I wanted to start by thanking Marco Clark and Laura Sanders for the chance to address members of the Institute today. And we'll have a little prayer at the beginning. It's a little different. It's actually part of a letter written by Brother Andre Maute when he was stationed in Algeria. He was in the first batch of brothers and priests, Holy Cross priests, Holy Cross brothers, to go to Algeria. That was in 1840. And he was there only 2 years before the mission was squashed for reasons I don't want to go into here, but Brother Andre suffered terribly. He was our premier brother. He was the first brother of St. Joseph to actually persevere in the community. And it's sad how he suffered over there physically. And I'll read you a little segment from a letter of his from 1841, right near the end of his time there. My soul is languishing more than my body. I have to tell you, my Reverend Father, that I often miss my regular spiritual exercises. Through my own fault, I do them without fervor. I have above all neglected to read and prepare for prayer. I've observed grand silence badly. I have neither meditation book nor particular examination. Most often I do these exercises while walking to avoid the torment of my sores. These are the sores that he was suffering physically. He's writing to Moreau, who's back in France. I confess to the parish priest every week. I'm very happy with my confessor. He knows how to drive scruples away. My confessions are short and precise. He doesn't want me to fast. Up to now, I've had the good fortune to take Holy Communion twice a week. The same temptations that I had in France, I still fight, and I'm not better than before. Please pray for me, my Reverend Father, because I'm not winning the game of life, and I fear death. These are sad, sad sentiments indeed from someone who probably deserved better treatment than he got near the end of his life. Well, I'm going to start off my paper by telling you that I came to Holy Cross when I was 13 years old. I know you're probably thinking he didn't know any better, but I loved it. I was 13 years old from a small town in Illinois and fell in love with Watertown, Wisconsin, where I was with about 50 other young men who wanted to be brothers. Only about 10 of them were my own age, and the rest were out of high school. I taught in Holy Cross institutions for 46 out of the 57 years of my teaching career. 11 years I taught in Wisconsin for Franciscan sisters. The rest of the time I was in Holy Cross institutions. I began as an English and French teacher in 1963 at Monroe Catholic Central High School in Michigan, just south of Detroit. I was 21 years old, newly sprung from the University of Notre Dame. I taught all the senior English classes at Monroe Catholic Central. I taught one French class and one freshman religion class. I had in one senior English class a senior who was 20 years old. I was 21. He failed the class. I am haunted by him to this very day. The next year, at the ripe old age of 22, I was named assistant principal of that school. I did not cut back on any of my teaching duties. I was also de facto head of the guidance department, which consisted of myself and the head football coach. Our office was a storage room on the second floor of the school. I had absolutely no preparation for administration outside of inheriting from Brother Ambrose, the outgoing principal, the cardboard chart that he had used every spring to organize the class schedule for the following academic year. After Monroe, I spent 6 wonderful years at Cathedral High School in Indianapolis, where I had responsibility for nothing but teaching English and French. After Cathedral, I spent 5 years at St. Edward High School in Lakewood, Ohio, before heading off to the University of Chicago for graduate work in Renaissance literature. The next item of business to settle this afternoon for this workshop presentation is the constitution of the members. From attendance at Holy Cross Institutes in earlier years, I am going to presume that many of you are administrators at Holy Cross schools. Why then would I be talking to you about teaching methodology? First of all, I'm going to take for granted that you began your career as a teacher. Only after you had understood the dynamics of the classroom did you move into administrative roles. But I'm going to assume that all of you are vitally interested in your faculty's superb teaching, so anything you can learn about the earliest approaches of Holy Cross educators to 19th century classrooms will help you understand not only why, but also how Holy Cross was and continues to be intensely interested in fine teaching by fine teachers. I have a PowerPoint, but it doesn't seem to be coming up, and I'm not sure what to do. So I'll just keep going on and pretend there's a PowerPoint up there, and I'll describe various slides.
Brother George,
Yeah.
I did make you a co-host. So if you try the PowerPoint now, perhaps it will work.
Oh, are you Richard Bouch?
Yes.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Brother George.
What's happening?
Does it seem to be? Are you able to share your screen?
Oh, share the screen. All
Yeah.
right. I see
Yeah, if you
that.
hit share screen, and
Okay.
then if you see that whichever little, you should see your PowerPoint up there.
I see a word that says share. Oh, it says PowerPoint? No, it
Well,
says whiteboard, says
right.
screen.
Is your PowerPoint open on your computer?
Oh, I need that. Okay.
If the
Hang
PowerPoint
on.
is open on the computer, then if you then go back and hit share, and it should show up. You should see a little version of it.
Okay. All right, now I'm back over here and I'm on, let's see, share. All I'm getting is a picture of the singer Cher. No.
Where's Sunny?
There. So
Where's Sunny?
are you seeing the PowerPoint now?
We can see it, yeah. And I think if we also see the rest of your screen. So if you go to your PowerPoint and kind of enlarge it a little bit, then that's what we'll see.
Enlarge the PowerPoint. Okay.
Let's see if I can.
How's that?
Oh yeah.
That good?
That is very good.
All right. and you can read everything there.
Yes.
Okay. And that you're familiar with. And that's where I am right now in my paper. So, Richard, should I continue with the paper?
Yes, you should. And I can't advance your PowerPoint, so you're going to have to advance your PowerPoint,
Okay.
pause your paper
right.
in advance when you need
Yeah.
to.
Okay, I've got it all set up, so I've got the numbers in the margins. So
All right, good for you. Yeah, yep, it's going to be fine.
All right, here we go. Let's talk now about the early brothers of Saint Joseph, who started out in northwest France in a little town called Rouillé. You already undoubtedly know their genesis, so while I will only skim over that to make sure we are on the same page about origin. At a priest's retreat in the summer of 1818, the bishop of the Le Mans diocese suggested to a priest named James Francis Dujarrier that he start a religious community of teaching brothers to tend to schools in little towns around the diocese. Dujarrier had already started a group of sisters, the Sisters of Providence, a dozen years earlier, and they were doing fine work educating young girls in the area. They were, in fact, thriving. So by word of mouth, news soon spread that Dujarrier would be welcoming recruits for his new community of religious brothers. He had absolutely no training in religious formation, and he was fortunate that the sisters had been given a wonderful and saintly Mother General to guide them in their earliest years. Where did the young men who came to Rouillé get their knowledge about brothers? Why did they choose this form of brotherhood during the very turbulent time in which they were living? What gave them the incentive to become teachers with very little education themselves? Then, with their limited background as teachers in rural communities, how did they come to a vision of a world mission? How did their ministry attract hundreds of new members by the middle of the 20th century? And today, how are the teachers in our Holy Cross schools carrying on the brothers' work of 200 years? In the earliest years of the community, this man, Brother Andre Maute, was the man who directed the new members in their studies and checked on the brothers already out teaching in schools. He was quite the worker. He did get 6 months off to study with the Christian brothers in Paris, and he spent another 5 months with the brothers in Le Mans. So he had some training. He had more training in religious formation, in fact, than Dujarrier did. Dujarrier was a parish priest. He was not a religious. But Brother Andre Maute had enough formation from the Christian brothers so he could come back to Rouillé and run the whole works. Dujarrier, of course, was caught up with running a parish full-time. He also was de facto head of the Sisters of Providence, and the third Mother General was a real handful, Mother Marie Lecoeur. They had lots of fights, so he had his hands full with Mother Marie Lecoeur. So he delegated tons of responsibility to Brother Andre Maute, so much so that Brother Andre Maute has been called the second founder of the community by Father Phileas Vanier, who was an archivist for the congregation back in the 1940s and 50s. So this is our man. And this wonderful sketch of him was done by Brother James Kane from the Moro province. We have no photo of Brother Andre Maute. We have no picture. So this is what Brother James Kane generated from vibrations he got after reading all of the letters that Brother Andre Maute had written. I fed him the letters, and someone upstairs in heaven fed him the inspiration, and he came up with this wonderful image of Brother Andre Maute. I keep that hanging in my bedroom for inspiration. All right, back to my paper. In his circular letter of July 27th, 1826, Andre stipulates that each brother is to bring to the annual summer retreat at Rouillé 4 examples of his handwriting, one large, one medium, one fine, and one example with each of the rules of arithmetic that he knows. With that last stipulation, Andre would not only be able to judge the legibility of a brother's penmanship, but also assess the progress each brother had made in mastering arithmetic. The brothers came together only once a year from all of their little towns. They were in about 45 or 50 towns, and they would come together for 2 weeks at the end of August, the early part of September, for the annual retreat at Rouillé, and they loved that. So Andre would have a chance then to address all of them and to assess how their handwriting was and what they had done to master arithmetic. Handwriting in the century before typewriters and computers was a desired skill. In a letter to Brother Adrian, dated December 18, 1827, Brother Andre notes that he has sent some examples of writing for Adrian's students. What he means by this is not clear, but I presume these are not just examples of penmanship, but rather formulaic examples of letters of inquiry, letters of thanks, letters of condolence, and so forth, similar to what we can find in Renaissance manuals by Erasmus of Rotterdam and John Hoskins. Today, a good letter of application or a good letter of recommendation can still make the difference between getting or not getting a job or getting entrance to a university. So writing means more than penmanship. It means organization. It means word choice. It means proper grammar and punctuation. These were some of the skills that the early brothers needed. Now, what about arithmetic? Has it changed since the early days of Brother Andre's supervision? 2 plus 2 is still 4, but students today working with high tech have enhanced motivation to learn. I like to believe that if Andre were alive today, he would be encouraging students to study calculus and quantum mechanics. We should remember that the early brothers, however, taught only in grade schools until 1837, when the first Holy Cross High School was opened in Le Mans by Basil Moreau. Motivational tools were as important in the early schools of the brothers as they are today, especially end-of-the-year prizes. In his 1826 end-of-the-year circular letter, Brother Andre wrote, quote, "With this notice, brothers will distribute school prizes and fix the end of classes so as to be at Rouillé on the eve of the retreat," end of quotation. Whether these prizes took the form of ribbons or medals, I don't know, but I do remember seeing a motivational medal from the 19th century in the archives room at the Holy Cross School in New Orleans before Hurricane Katrina devastated that historic campus and washed the archives out into the river. Someplace at the bottom of the Mississippi, there's one of these motivational medals that would have been handed out in the last week or two of a semester by one of the brothers of St. Joseph. Here's the church at Miley. I don't have a picture of the school, but this is what the church looked like in Brother Andre's day. Miley was one of the prize schools of the Brothers of St. Joseph. Andre was a careful administrator. In 1829, he compiled an inventory of the school and the brothers' house at Miley, where there were usually 3 brothers teaching, a rare example of an early school of the brothers having more than one teacher. The Brothers of St. Joseph typically taught by themselves in a small town or might have 2 brothers in that small town, unlike the Christian brothers who, by their rule, could never have fewer than 3 brothers teaching in any one location. That's why we went into those little towns, because the Christian brothers wouldn't go there. Brother Andre's inventory is maddeningly precise. Quote, 3 windows with 2 clasps, the first on the courtyard with 24 panes, 1 set of ironwork and 2 iron hooks, end of quotation. Such details were written down for every ding-dong room in the building. This inventory goes on for pages. It's in his own handwriting. I've inspected it in the Notre Dame library. It's pretty exhaustive. The library, oh, by the way, I translated it. If you want a translation of it, send me an email. I'll be happy to send you a translation of the inventory. That inventory is fascinating. There are 55 titles of books in their little library, several in multiple volumes. And here's a slide of some of the titles of the library at Miley. History of God's People, Charamois Catechism, Dialogues of the Dead. Most of the books are religious in name, but there are listed a Latin grammar and Wally's vocabulary, world geography, a list of plants, a book of plain chant methodology, The Good Gardener, Life of the Dauphin. Now, there wasn't a Dauphin in France anymore because the revolution had done away with the king. When I come to think of it, I'm going to correct myself because by this time, the king had been restored somewhat after Napoleon was done away with, and he would have had a son, and that son would have been called the Dauphin. So this book, which I would love to see, was probably the life of the King of France at the time, Life of the Dauphin. New Proper Speaking, Grammatical Analysis, Abridged Classical Arithmetic, and Sylvester's Arithmetic. Some titles listed, like Plans for Useful Teaching and Conducting Christian Schools, suggest the library was for the use of the brothers only, not open to student perusal. But I suspect then as now, an occasional bright and interested student would be blessed by a weekend loan of one book or another. When I was in grade school, we had no library in either the school or the town, but the next town over had a library financed by Andrew Carnegie next to the railroad depot. I never set foot in that library, but my uncle, who lived in that town, walked to that library every couple of nights and would bring 2 or 3 books back home. He never graduated from high school, but he self-taught himself, I'm sure mostly through the help of that Andrew Carnegie Library. How many of the books in the Miley school library belong to the brothers, and how many belong to the parish, I cannot say. But Miley was one of the prize schools run by the Brothers of St. Joseph for 37 years. I suspect at least some of the books were gifted to individual brothers by grateful parents or by a grateful pastor. Brother Andre does mention in an 1829 letter to Brother Adrian that Andre was sending Adrian a penmanship book. That book, at least we know, began life in Rouillé. That is not a brother of St. Joseph in drag in the back of this classroom. I have no photograph of brothers teaching in one-room school, so I had to use this one. We have to remember that photography was only invented around 1829, and Brother Andre already had passed away in 1844, and photography really didn't come into its own until the American Civil War. So I'm guessing this photo is of a one-room school sometime around 1890. But again, at least you'd get an idea of what a one-room school looked like with the chairs and all facing in one direction. How many students were taught in each class in the early schools of the Brothers of St. Joseph? We know that at Miley, I showed you a picture of the Church of Miley, there were 55 students, probably all male, in the upper class and 55 in the lower class. That's why they'd need 2 teachers, 55 for the upper one brother and 55 for the other brother. Miley was, according to Brother Andre, the best and most agreeable foundation in our congregation. Each school brought in 800 francs a year, which would have been $160 in America in 1820, and that would convert to $2,960 today. Such a low salary should not shock us. In my first year of teaching back in 1963, my salary was $1,200 for the whole year, not per month. It was $1,200 for the whole year. I did get room and board paid for by the local parishes. Regardless the size of a class then in 1820 as now, 2021, the most important qualities a good teacher needs are imagination and adaptability. Teachers have certainly been tested this past year in 2020, 2021, with students learning at home on their computers. At first, many thought this method horrible, but some teachers found it not only challenging, but rewarding. Donald Stamp at the University of St. Louis wrote about his experiences teaching online this past year this way, and I quote him, "At first I thought remote instruction wasn't real teaching, but now I'm not so sure. It turns out oddly that the best classes take place among students who prepare, and when they're locked down with extracurricular activities, they suddenly find themselves with nothing to do but study. It also happens that when you give out discussion questions in advance and require 4 posts per hour in an online chat room, you get the best discussion of your life. Everybody talks." That's what Donald Stamp found out last year teaching at St. Louis. I'm sure many teachers had that same discovery, especially the quiet students who tend not to say much in class. When they're forced to make an online entry every day that will be shared with all the other members of the class, they start coming out of themselves and everybody talks, as Donald points out. Teaching conditions in France were not bad in the middle of the 19th century. Local schools operated under the watchful eye of a town council and a regional supervisor. If there was a problem with a brother teacher, a pastor or town council would not hesitate to inform Rouillet of their displeasure. One brother, for example, had become alienated in his school because of his propensity to hit students. The town council, in a letter to Father Dujarrier, wanted the brother removed. Generally, however, the brothers did an admirable job teaching basics, as we know from the number of schools under their direction and which were opened within a very short period of time, that is 15 years, because we presume word of mouth spread parish to parish about the excellent teaching of the Brothers of St. Joseph. By 1825, that's 5 years after the first brothers showed up in Rouillet, by 1825, there were 40 schools under the brothers' direction, and by 1829, there were 48 schools. Most of those schools, of course, having just one brother per school. But let us leave France for a few moments. What about conditions in the early Holy Cross missions of Algeria, Indiana, and Canada? We have 3 rather long letters written by Brother André Maute from Algeria, where he was sent by Moreau in 1840 to teach and supervise the other teaching brothers. First of all, the brothers were not received there with open arms by the public school teachers already in Algeria. The public school teachers resented the prospect of competition. So at first, all the brothers could do was work in an orphanage in Mustafa near Algiers, the capital. The poverty was shocking to Brother André, especially that of the refugees, fleeing hostile Arabs and living in ramshackle tents. After 6 weeks, André began to hemorrhage from an unknown disease. He weakened but continued to work at the orphanage, which had begun to teach outside students, 6 boys who came to learn their catechism and prayers. They apparently were no threat to the local public school teachers. By fall of 1841, André was no longer near Algiers. He was out in the boonies in Philippeville, Here's a picture of Philippville today. Today it's called Oran. It's right near the ancient site of Hippo, where St. Augustine lived. In Philippville, the pastor refused him clothing. Andre had to wear the same underwear for 3 months. He was alone in Philippville and teaching 6 hours a day, 3 before noon and 3 after noon. He had 36 students he called inscrutable. He wished he could work with only 8 or 10 at a time. Their chief weakness was an unwillingness to work hard. Times never change. Half an hour a day was devoted to catechism. Some students were learning long division. Andre dictated words every day and corrected spelling, his only way to teach because they had no textbooks. There was only one window in the classroom, a small one, which looked out onto the street. Passers-by often stopped to look in and listen. The one door into the classroom was often opened by someone looking for the pastor. Dust fell on the students' heads from the pastor's bedroom up above. Andre couldn't teach singing because it bothered the pastor. There was no bathroom. Andre had to go out into the mountains to relieve himself. The pastor, on the other hand, had a bedpan which is made empty. Thursday was Andre's only day off because on Sundays he had to prepare the church for Mass and Vespers. For daily breakfast, he had a piece of bread and some dried fruit. In the afternoon, he got a cup of soup. But he did get a month off in the summer. Hallelujah. I tell you all these things not to frighten you, not even to instill in you a reverence for Brother Andre, a reverence he well deserves, but rather I tell you these things to let you know that the devotion and hard work you see in your Holy Cross High School teachers today have roots that go back solidly and determinedly to the earliest brothers of St. Joseph. I hope they inspire you and your teaching faculty. That is my fervent wish. Now, what about teaching methodology back then? Here's a picture of a master teacher, Brother Vincent Pio, who came to Indiana with Father Soren in 1841, and then settled at Notre Dame in 1842. He lived till 1990. He was the third last of the pioneers to die. He died in 1990. Father Soren died in 1993, and Brother Francis Xavier died in 1990. That should be 1890. Holy Toledo. Can't get good secretaries anymore. Look how they make mistakes. Yeah, that would be 1797 to 1890. And Brother Francis Xavier, the last of the pioneer brothers to die, died in 1896. And 2 days before he died, a brother named Brother Bernard Gervais, a master teacher, was new at Notre Dame, and he had to dig the grave for Brother Francis Xavier 2 days after he died. Now, I have shaken hands with Brother Bernard Gervais, who shook hands in 1896 with Brother Francis Xavier. So if you want to continue the chain, this beautiful, beautiful chain, you can touch your screen as I'm touching it, and there, the magic continues. I've touched you, you've touched me, I touched Brother Bernard Gervais, he touched Brother Francis Xavier, who lived with Brother Vincent Pio, the master teacher in Indiana. All right, now let's talk about methodology. How did the Brothers of St. Joseph teach in a school that gathered boys from age 6 to age 14 in one room? You may already know the answer to this question from speaking to teachers who have taught in one-room schools. My Aunt Lucy began her teaching career in a one-room school in rural Illinois. Brother Ken and Judge who spent most of his life as a history teacher and guidance counselor at St. Edward High School in Lakewood, began his career at a one-room school in Iowa. He rode a horse to and from school each day. So imagine having between 25 and 50 children in one room with a pot-bellied stove for the winter. Now that sounds like a lot in one room, 50. But here in Columba Hall, we have a brother. He's in his 90s. He lives down the corridor from me. When he started teaching as a brother of Holy Cross back in the 1940s, late 1940s, he had 74 fourth graders in his classroom in New York City, 74 in one room. He was the only teacher, and he survived. All right, so you've got all these kids in one room. What do you do with them? Some children can already spell, some can't. Some know their multiplication tables, some don't. So what do you do to teach rudimentary skills to those who need rudimentary skills without boring older students who can already jump through the hoops? Small groups. Small groups worked back then, they still work today. At that point in the day, when it was time for arithmetic, older children could sit with a small group to drill them. The teacher then reserves herself to the most needy. Ditto for reading. We are learning today, if we ever really forgot, that children learn from peers, and we learn best from ourselves. Students learn best from themselves. We do not need an all-wise guru in front of the room dispensing kernels of knowledge. We are best self-taught. Teachers open doors, students go through them, helping each other along the way. Admit now that you learn more from your high school lab partner than you did from the chemistry teacher. I know I did. The teacher inspires and the students teach themselves and each other. I return to my own experience in grade school. At St. Laborious School in Steger, Illinois, we had 4 classrooms in our school building, 2 grades to each room, 1 through 8. Thus, I had Sister Marcelia for grades 1 and 2, Sister Jude for grades 3 and 4. I wish I could remember their methodology. All I remember is that they were excellent and I learned. But I imagine on a Monday morning, Sister Marcelia would start the day after prayers and the Pledge of Allegiance and handing out white and chocolate milk, start the day by telling the second grade half of the room that they should work on the arithmetic problems on such and such a page or on the board. Then she could give her undivided attention to the first graders as they struggle to learn to read. Of course, some subjects in one room schools lend themselves to one lesson fits all. Art and music, for example, I think would work nicely with multiple levels of learners. For art, the teacher roams to comment on various art projects in progress. And for music, the 6-year-olds sing America the Beautiful or Joy to the World as gustily as the 12-year-olds. One-room school teaching has not really been consigned to the dustbin of education. Even college classrooms break down into small groups to compare balance sheets, to discuss Black Lives Matter, to argue about the real meaning of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. In my own final years of teaching, I found that was a great way to teach. If you would throw out a question like, who's the better poet, William Wordsworth or John Keats, and then give the small groups 10 minutes in little groups to come to some kind of a consensus or to fight among themselves, and then have those small groups report back, you often got a lot more done and a lot more taught than simply walking in and saying, John Keats was a better poet than William Wordsworth, and here's why. Put it in your notebooks and shut up. How did the early brothers of St. Joseph know if their teaching was effective? When the brothers of St. Joseph came under the direction of Basil Morrow in 1835, they were supervised by a man who was not only a master teacher himself, but a man who also wrote about good teaching. In his pamphlet, Christian Education, Morrow wrote beautifully about how to teach. I had my students read this book for several years. I think it works very nicely at least it did in college classrooms. So here's what Basil Moreau wrote. The classroom is a bowl of emotions. Everyone has stuff, and it's not like there is a place to check the baggage before we enter the room. And we all know that if we are not attentive to the emotional needs of our students and ourselves, the culture of the place can become very unfocused, confusing, and stressful in an instant. This student makes a sharp criticism of the teacher. Then the teacher reacts angrily. Another student then innocently asks the teacher for an extension on a paper, but the teacher refuses without even listening to the reason for the request because she or he is so angry. Then, because trust has been broken in the classroom, this group of kids feels no guilt about cheating on a homework assignment, and the cycle continues to go on and on and on. Indeed, once that train leaves the station, it takes a long time, weeks, sometimes months, to reclaim the culture of a classroom and put it back in a positive direction. Boy, that sounds like something someone would write today, but Morrow wrote that back in the middle of the 19th century. I don't think he used the word kids. I can't imagine Morrow. Well, he might have. I think that might be something that the translator slipped into that wonderful book from Christian Education. I've come to a new appreciation of Morrow recently because I chanced upon a book of his conferences. There's nothing in that book about teaching. You get that from his pamphlet, Christian Education, which, by the way, is online. If you've never read it, I recommend it highly. But the thing about Morrow that I respect so much now is his spirituality and those conferences that he wrote, especially the one on St. Joseph. Wow, beautiful stuff. Morrow is practical, if anything. In his recommendations in Christian Education, these following suggestions he gives are still effective today. Stand at the door, greet each student by name. Oh, I wish I had known that when I started teaching, but I, like a lot of other guys, just went to the classroom and stood behind my desk waiting for the students to come in and fill the spaces. But this is such a great idea. Stand at the door, greet each student by name. Be prepared, plan each lesson. Well, if you don't, you know what happens. It's bad. Be organized, have the day's schedule posted. Be a good listener. Be fair. Be honest. Be human. In all matters of teaching, we should remember that as Holy Cross educators, we are intent on certain charisms that should typify all Holy Cross schools. In his 2020 address to the Holy Cross Institute, Brother Robert Lavelle specified the following common characteristics of our teaching apostolate. Now, these are really up to date. He shared these with me. It provides a student-centered education beginning with where the individual finds himself or herself. It seeks an understanding and collaborative relationship with the local church and civic community. It promotes collaboration and empowerment of faculty and parents. It places strong emphasis on education for justice and a commitment to an option for the poor. And we'll be hearing a lot about that tomorrow when we spend time looking at racism and its effects in our schools and what we can do about it. Brother Robert adds, good teaching assimilates different groups of religious and ethnic backgrounds. Our schools offer financial aid and scholarships to allow that diversity to happen for young persons who can benefit from the offered experience and education. We place emphasis on service. We identify the campus ministry and religious education programs as central to the institution and its curriculum. and it places an intentional effort to awaken within students, faculty, and staff a fundamental Christian sense of call or vocation to live and do the gospel. Then Brother Roberts specifies 5 significant threads for our schools: the education of the whole child, inclusiveness and fostering family spirit, commitment to excellence, option for the poor, and a faith development. Wow, what a slide. What in the heck is this all about? A piece of pottery by J. Strawman. Well, let's find out. We should not be afraid of so-called failure. Let's talk about failure. And look at that pot and tell me you're not looking at failure. In the Amagana culture of Chinese pottery, no piece of pottery is considered a failure. Visiting Suketoshi Matsuyama recently, the potter Dick Lehman from Goshen, Indiana, noted the following. Dick says this: through failure, we can find ways to overcome. In failure, we find new beauty. And for the next 30 minutes with him, this obviously feeble octogenarian suddenly regained the vigor and the strength and the voice of someone half his age. He moved around his studio, pulling pot after pot from storage places. Look at this one. This wood-fired piece did not get to temperature. It was a failure. But look at what beauty occurred when I refired it in an electric kiln. And this one I made when I did not have access to a reduction kiln, but I wanted reduction effects, so I added reducing material into the electric kiln. Do you see what happened? And just look at this one. The ash got piled up so fast on this wood-fired piece that it did not melt. I thought it was a total failure until I brushed off all the dry ash. Have you ever seen such a beautiful surface? And it never could have happened if it had not failed. Failure helps us to see with new eyes, to discover new beauty. That's from Dick Lehman and his visit to the Japanese potter. You look at this now, and you look at that, and you can say, I didn't fail today. My students still learned something from me. And a student says, I didn't fail this test. I didn't fail this quiz. I still learned something from my failure. So I think we should look on failure as progress, and so should our students. Messing up a chem lab experiment or losing a football game is not without value. We learn from our failures. Finally, when we come to the end of an analysis of teaching effectiveness in a Holy Cross school, what can we use as a touchstone for our effectiveness? Brothers Philip Smith and Ben Rossi, both experienced teachers, have concluded the following. Any experienced teacher will tell you that the true sign that learning has taken place in a student is her or his ability to generate a new idea at the end of a given unit, semester, or course. This is the whole essence of doctoral studies and the goal that is articulated in modern educational theories. Indeed, when the mind has wrestled with, organized, analyzed, weighed, and assessed material, and then drawn a conclusion, what was originally information is transformed into some new insight, some exciting fruit that just must be shared with others. It should not surprise us, therefore, that the divine master, the Logos, who is the eternal word or idea of God, allowed his very self to be examined, wrestled with, beaten up, and ultimately concluded or ended upon the cross. And what happens next? That life-giving Eucharistic blood flows from his side, some new fruit of this drama that is shared with others, and as such literally generates new people, saints, disciples, and apostles. If we could just become like Christ and adopt a constantly crucified form interiorly, we would stand to gain much. We would become people with a deep knowledge of the meaning of life and we would spend our days feeding others the fruits of this contemplation. That's the end of the quote from Brother Philip and Brother Ben. These are high sentiments indeed, but why else do teachers become teachers? We teach to learn. And we should not be insular. Why did Basil Morrow jump at the chance to send teaching brothers to a foreign land far from the diocese where the brothers were founded? He did so because he realized that all people are one people, that little children in that little children in Africa deserve the same educational attention afforded the children in Le Mans, Miley, and Rouillé. And we ourselves are enriched by contact with people outside our country, our political sphere, our ethnicity. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis says it beautifully. The word culture points to something deeply embedded within a people, its most cherished convictions and its way of life. A people's culture is more than an abstract idea. It has to do with their desires, their interests, and ultimately the way they live their lives. To speak of a culture of encounter means that we as a people should be passionate about meeting others, seeking points of contact, building bridges, planning a project that includes everyone. This becomes an aspiration and a style of life. We enculturate our students, and our students enculturate us. Amen. Thank you for listening. Well, Richard, how do I get this big again?
Okay, Brother George, do you see where it says stop share?
Stop share.
Right.
Okay, I don't see stop share. Well, that all I did was I got rid of the PowerPoint.
If you close your PowerPoint, okay.
I did that.
Let's see. Let me try. I have an idea. Let me try something.
Oh, I got it. There.
Okay.
Stop
There you
share.
are. Yeah.
Hey.
Hello, brother. This is Joe. This is Joe from San Antonio. Thank you for your wisdom and your joy. And I found your book about Africa, about Algeria, a couple of years ago at Half Price Books. And I was very moved by your reminder. Yes, that one. I was very, very moved by Brother Andre's letters, and very inspired by Brother Lewis, the one brother who was drowned. I was curious, what do you know about that young man? Because it was a very moving image I had of that.
Louis Marchand, who drowned. He was taking care of the orphans in Algiers, and went off into the ocean, swimming with them one day, and drowned there. Well, they buried him in Africa, and then all the brothers and priests left Africa in 1842, went back to Le Mans because their conditions were awful, especially Brother Andre. He suffered terribly physically, almost died. And then in 1844, Father Moreau sent brothers back to Africa. He didn't send priests back this time, but the second time he sent only brothers. And Brother Hilarion Ferton, the superior of the brothers, went and found Brother Lewis's grave, and he had it dug up and took all the bones. They were 2 years, gone now. Took all the bones and sent them back to Le Mans so he could be buried with the community back there. That's about all I know. I think we have some letters by him in the book on Algeria, Holy Cross in Algeria, but I haven't looked at those in many years, so I can't say much more about Lewis.
Thanks
again.
Yeah, we're very inspiring. So I appreciate your joy and your wisdom, Holy Cross.
you in San Antonio at one time?
I am right now.
Oh, you are there? No,
Yes,
okay.
Richard and I are colleagues. I teach theology, 8th, 9th, and 10th. So I've used the story of Brother Andre a few times in class. Here's one more Andre that we celebrate. So
We only have 3 Africa letters by Brother Andre, but all the others, I've translated them all, but they're not in book form. I can email them if you want to read more of Andre's writings, or I put them into a little book that I Xeroxed, and I can send that off to you if you want that.
Please, be great.
Other letters that were translated are from the Indiana brothers. So you got 10 years of Indiana letters, first 10 years, and then the first 10 years of the Africa letters. That's that.
Thank you, brother.
And then I make a big deal out about Brother Andre in the latest book, The Brothers of St. Joseph.
Good.
I feel like Joyce Meyer. Bring the book. She's always huckstering her books.
Get a book. You get a book. You get a book. Yes, that's great. Thank you, brother.
In your paper, you mentioned Father Moreau's writings on Saint Joseph. How can we get our hands on something like that?
You know, that book has been out of print for ages, Richard. But I love that, and I just finished it a couple weeks ago. But I don't think you'll be able to get your hands on that book. It's a rarity. So what you're going to have to do is have me make a copy of that and send it to you.
Oh,
I'm taking your name down right now.
Thank you.
It's really a beautiful.
And I'd be interested in those translations as well that Joe Foreman talked about.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
Oh, the Andre from Algeria?
Yeah. I have that book too. Yeah, anything outside the book would be great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you, brother. Yes. Pray for you on Monday.
Can we go get coffee now?
Take care, brother. See you later.
God bless, brother. Take care.